Well, I think when you grow up in many small communities, I call them burgs, by the way, no offense to any West Virginians, but I think when you grow up and you sort of feel by yourself and you're alone a lot, all of your friends don't like to do the same things that I like to do. I love the woods. I mean, it was like, it almost felt like I was an explorer every time I went in the woods. The steeper the mountain, the more I wanted to climb it. Never knowing what I was going to see. The river was always mysterious. You were always hoping to catch the biggest fish in the river. And one day I picked up a basketball. Have no idea why, but it changed my life forever. And when I was little, you know, I didn't grow up in the best of circumstances, and obviously this book is about how I grew up in my life and some of the things I didn't see that I wish I could have seen. My life was largely spent with me being my best friend. Now, how does that happen? Because you talk to yourself all the time. And when I was going fishing, I would always say, I didn't care if anyone caught a fish. I was going to be there, and I was going to not only catch a fish, but I was going to catch the biggest one. When I would go in the woods, never knowing what I was going to see, there wasn't nearly as much game around, but it was always a thrill for me just to go the sights you would see, and particularly when you're up looking down. But when I picked this basketball up, that's when my imagination really kicked in. I mean, my gosh, if somebody would have seen me out there with the ball, and they would have probably said he's crazy because I was talking to myself. You couldn't see it. I was a basketball coach. I was a referee. I would never not let my team lose. I would never not make the last shot in the game. And at that point in time, it took me a lot of ways and I guess my imagination to put 1 second back on the clock so you can make a darn shot. And people, as I got older, people, and particularly as a professional player, we had a very famous announcer, Chick Hearn. He gave me a nickname, Mr. Clutch. And writers would come to me, and you know, a lot of times late in the game, I'd make a lot of shots that helped decide games. And they always asked me, why aren't you afraid to do that? Well, I said, I've done it a million times in my life, and I failed a lot when I was little. But I learned one lesson, not be afraid to take it, and not be afraid to think you're going to make it. But those were special days growing up for me, and growing up in a small community. I learned a lot from my childhood. I learned a lot from the people I was around. Everyone led a tough life. They were all hardworking, nice people. But obviously you would want more, and I did want more out of my life.
So is the image that probably all of us have of you, solitary boy, in the holler, dribbling the basketball, shooting. In the book you talk about putting a basket up on the side of a bridge, and if you didn't make the shot, you had to run down to the ravine and catch it, so that gave you motivation to make the shot. Is that image accurate? And you also talk in the book about your realization at a later age, after having read Malcolm Gladwell's The Outliers, the importance of repetition and just practicing and practicing and practicing, making that shot 1,000 and 2,000 and 5,000 times. Is that image accurate of you out there shooting by yourself?
You know, it's pretty accurate. Yes, it is. Very accurate, because I would put a hoop up anywhere. And one of the things I didn't mention in this book, and probably should have mentioned in it, was when I was young and it was way too cold to shoot outside, and I shot outside a lot in the winter. But I would take an old coat hanger and I would hang it on the door sill in my house. And I'd take a pair of socks and tie it up, and I would shoot baskets in the house all the time. But there was a problem with that. I would always be scratching the doors in the house, and my mother, who was meticulous, didn't quite like it. But I did that all the time. But it was never practiced. It was never practiced. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And it was just something that was innately important for me to do. I loved the fact that I had a very vivid imagination, and I could be anything I wanted to be. I could make myself really, really special. And the reason I stayed out there so much is that I just loved it. It was never practiced. But frankly, I was afraid to go home, so that's why I stayed out there so much.
You write in the book about the, I quote, diminished expectations in your hometown, which is typical of a lot of small towns up in the hollers, and the drive that created in you. And you also write that started, I think, the fire, which you compare to the eternal flame at Arlington that burned white hot inside of you to succeed. And did you take a lot of your drive from the diminished expectations that others may have had for you that didn't really understand who you were?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I got to the point in my life, and I would tell each and every young person, if there's some young ones here, you know, a lot of people say, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do it. Well, I got to be pretty defiant when I was young. No meant yes to me a lot, because I know there's certain things I could do in my own mind that no one would give you credit for. There were, I think, one of the saddest but maybe best things that ever happened to me in my life was that I was in a hot August day shooting basketball at my neighbor's house, and they had a reasonable hoop up there. And I walked through my neighbor's yard, and I'll never forget, this is my next door neighbor. She said, well, there goes Jerry. He's not going to amount to very much in his life. And, you know, I wasn't bothering anyone. I was just out there talking to myself, interacting with myself. And I think back to those days, and when I went home, and obviously when I went home, it wasn't a very warm and fuzzy place. And for all of you, I wouldn't suggest you treat your children the way I was treated. But I'll never forget, that was one of the most hurtful things that anyone ever said to me at that point in time. At that point in my life. I wasn't bothering anyone. I was out there having a good time. I was out there using my imagination. And things like that have fueled me. There was another article a guy from Pittsburgh wrote after I started playing basketball, professional basketball, why Jerry West won't last very long in the NBA. People can't look inside of you. No one can look inside of you. No one. And if there's some young kid out there that has a lot of ambitions in life, it doesn't have to be as an athlete. My goodness, there's so many things you can do that are more important than being an athlete. The only thing athletics does, if you're good enough, you're going to get a lot of publicity. Some of it's always not going to be good. And you're going to have to learn how to take the good with the bad. But there's so many other things in this world that you can contribute to, and particularly to contribute to young kids, trying to help them, trying to make a better life for themselves, encouragement, being a mentor, giving. The charity of my choice is West Virginia University. I'll tell you, always will be. And because this place really set the foundation of who I am and what I became. Just because I live in California, I'm not a Southern California boy.
You can take Jerry out of the country, but you all know the rest.
That's right. I'm still a West Virginian at heart. I love to come back here. I know as you get older, people want to call you Mr. West. Most of my friends call me Jerry, regardless of what age they are. I like that better. But I love West Virginia. This is really an important place for me, and I will never forsake this place, that's for sure.
East Bank High School, the Pioneers. Your senior year, you won the state championship. You knocked off your buddy Willie Akers' Mullins High School team in the semifinals. And then many of you may remember when Jerry beat the Morgantown Mohegans in the state final. Morgantown was led by the irreplaceable Jay Jacobs. What's your memory, Jerry, from that? Because you played 2 games in a row, right? You had the weekend up here in Morgantown at the old field house.
Well, little did I know that maybe my best friend in life, Willie Akers, they were favored to beat us, and they didn't beat us. And I think I scored over 40 in the game. I don't remember what it was. But it was in the old field house, and little did I know that that was going to be the next place that I would have a chance to do something different the next day. And the next day we played that guy, what's his name, Jay Jacobs' team? Jay Jacobs, I don't know if he's here tonight, but he's the only guy that I know when he was at West Virginia University. And he tells a lot of stories, and they become embellished. I don't even know if he got in a game when he was here. But, of course, everyone was rooting for Morgantown High School. And I fouled out at the end of 3 quarters, and we were ahead by 17 when I fouled out. And it was one of the most incredible days of my life. And I think the first time that maybe I ever felt special. And I had a man to come up to me last night down in, we had a, well, actually not last night, when was that? Friday night? Thursday night, before you got a chance to go up and see West Virginia play in Syracuse. They didn't play that night, by the way.
Don't remind us.
I was
and
watching.
By the way, feel free to tell Johnny West not to wear an orange sweater to the Coliseum, particularly after our performance against Syracuse.
But anyway, we won that, and I went to East Bank High School, and the first time I ever felt really embarrassed, and most things embarrass me if they're about me. If people want to praise me, it's not something I feel very comfortable with. But I do remember going back, and they changed the name of East Bank to West Bank for a number of years, and where I felt pretty special at that point in my life, I know.
As you should. Let me, if I could, talk about recruiting at East Bank High School. Of course, it's a much different recruiting environment today than it was back in your era. But if let me read a brief little piece from the book. And by the way, Jerry writes, and I quote, "When I was being recruited, a number of schools offered me money, more than my father was making, and other things they shouldn't have, before I officially settled on West Virginia." So as an AD, I didn't hear that.
I heard it a lot.
But let me, if I could, write about one little anecdote about recruiting, Jerry. One coach, and I quote, "One coach, Kenny Loeffler, was so desperate for me to come to Texas A&M that he gave one of the greatest performances I have ever seen. He sat on our front porch, broke down in tears, and said he would see to it that I could go home whenever I wanted, that I got a car, which would have been of little use to me because I didn't know how to drive, and that I married the richest girl in Texas, and that I wouldn't have to wear a military uniform, among other enticements." But how were we so fortunate to get you to attend West Virginia University?
When I was really little, 7 or 8 years of age, West Virginia had a guy by the name of Mark Workman. He was from Charleston, West Virginia. I lived about 14 miles south of there. But at that point in time, my only vision of West Virginia sports was not on TV, but was over the radio. And I could always get bits and pieces of the games and get down to the nitty-gritty of the game, and I would never know who won. And so I'd have to wake up the next morning to see who had won the game. But I had my deceased brother-in-law took me to a West Virginia game,